Yes. Now, maybe you could tell us, first of all, a bit about your company and what it is you do, because we've heard about all of the challenges about fleet electrification, and I believe you have some of the solutions, so maybe you could start.
So first of all, it's a pleasure to be back in Ireland. Actually, for those of you that don't know, more than 10 years ago, we started one of the largest European projects on EV roaming with ESP and the City of Amsterdam, from which you've heard today, so it's always good to be back and to see some familiar faces and see all the work that we've been going through these 10 years. I feel like old already in this area. But basically, I founded The Loop 3 years ago. We were actually acquired by Galp Energy, which is Portuguese's largest energy group coming from the oil industry. And we are basically a technological platform. We call ourselves Mobility Change Platform, where we provide our solution to charge point operators or just companies that want to drive this mobility change shift. This means managing charging stations, managing fleets, and managing really what the future holds for how we are going to use the vehicles that we are going to use. So not just electric vehicles, but we can talk about bikes, for instance, and how companies can also be promoters for the use of bikes, motorcycles, or even walking.
Okay, and talk to me about roaming, because this is the big thing. So tell me, what is the difference then between the tap to pay and the roaming, and why does it make a difference?
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm a little bit biased, I have to say, because I've worked in this space and definition of roaming and all the standardization issues for the last 10 years, maybe. But roaming basically works on a principle which is a separation of activities. So we have a charge point operator whose main role would be to have an asset, which is a charging station that will be used by EV drivers, right? And then you have someone that is driving demand. Okay, so it means that those EV drivers are customers of someone, which we call a mobility service provider, and they will come to a charging station that is managed by a charge point operator, and they will use it. Okay, of course, what you see in most places and for most businesses out there, you have a merger of the two. We just saw that with the SSE and the way that they are building up their fast charging, ultra fast charging network, which basically they are a CPO, but they want to manage their own customers. So roaming, what it brings is that it brings this new role of an EMSP, where if you are a customer of one of these companies, you should be able to use whatever network is out there, right? Regardless if it's ESP, if it's SSE, if it's EasyGo, whoever is out there, you should be able to use it with your own contract. Okay? When we are discussing around tap to pay, basically what we are providing is the easiest choice for someone to charge, right? Not necessarily the best tailored or custom service, but it's really okay. So you have a Visa card, you can just go up to the charging station and you just use it. Maybe you'll pay a bigger price, maybe you won't, but it's a completely different customer experience.
And tell me, there's obviously each country has its own way of doing this. Is there a unified approach, or is there, what does the future look like in terms of, obviously this is going to have to be streamlined at some stage?
Yeah, well, I can talk about the future in a little bit. What for sure will happen, and we're seeing that happen already in industry today. But basically, you've seen two movements, right? There's one in which I was very deeply involved at European level, but mostly in my home country, Portugal, which is a top-down approach where roaming is by design mandatory. Okay, this means that if you are a charge point operator and you install a charging station that is publicly available, you must make sure that is available for use by any business. Okay, so this is a very strong requirement, but in the end, actually, what it does is that it generates a whole new industry. So, for instance, in a small country like Portugal, we have around 70 charge point operator, and I'd say half of them are mobility service providers. Okay, so it's, of course, you would say there's not enough market full of them, but it's funny enough to realize that you see a lot of newcomers that are fully virtual, because you can be fully virtual like this, and they really take a big portion of the market. Okay, so this I believe is a very, very interesting concept. What is going to happen in the future is something that I don't think that we have discussed that today. Probably, maybe the OEMs will say it's a concept of plug and charge, which could be, in essence, is just you plug your vehicle and you start charging. And that's what typically most home chargers do. But actually, the concept of plug and charge is that you plug your vehicle and your vehicle relays all the information to the charging station and then to all the systems that need to do the billing part. So all of that is automated. You just have to have your contract configured in the vehicle. You plug your vehicle and it works. Okay, so that's the ultimate consumer experience, if you like. Now, there's a number of interfaces that are being set up in place, basically on how the vehicles communicate this data and what's the content of this data and how can you securely store that data in the vehicle. And then it's all about, if we have something like this, do the OEMs control the customer since the beginning of the journey? But it's interesting to see how that is developing. So for instance, up until 1 year ago, the whole plug and charge experience could only be possible with one contract in a vehicle. So this means if the OEM had a contract, then they would own you forever, almost. Now it's open to the market. So I'm seeing a lot of different business models being implemented with things like this. We have the largest European and global roaming platform that is out there is Hubject, coming from the German industry, both the OEMs and utilities as well. We have the French platform Girev, which also has a very interesting footprint, namely here in the UK and Ireland. So in the end, all of this notion will converge to a fully seamless experience where you just plug your vehicle and the number of players in the background are just making sure that everyone gets paid.
And what's the sort of time frame for that?
Well, it's true that the concept of plug and charge has been around, I don't know, maybe for 8 years or so. The standard has been out there for a number of years. Well, just recently, in one of the biggest events in the industry in Germany, where I've been to, you could see the momentum taking up mostly from again, led by the Germans, which is a very important power in this area. You see the Americans as well in the newest regulations for the ramp up of their own charging infrastructure, making plug and charge mandatory. So I clearly see that as coming starting next year, but definitely until the end of the decade, we should have that. It's important to say that most of the existing vehicles are not compatible. Most of the existing infrastructure is not compatible, but could be retrofitted. So it's going to be a new game for the industry.
And who's going to be the driver behind this? Is it going to be what the public demands? Is it going to be regulation from the EU? I mean, you know, and who is going? If Germany is that ahead of the market in some respects, or France, like, is there going to be a dominant country in this, or is it just how is it going to pan out?
Well, the movements you see from the France and Germany are what we as part of the European Union typically see. It's those two big powers trying to shape and define a new market, right? So it's not really about the country itself. It's about what their industries represent and how they see the market going, right? So we have, for a number of years, been working with the European Commission on the definition of these open standards, on these open platforms. Honestly, I would love to see a more integrated energy and mobility market, because actually that's what we have been doing. So it's one thing to just try and solve the problem of me being able to charge in another charging station, but the purest of ideas, if you'd like, is for me to be able to be consuming energy that can be produced anywhere in Europe, right? So truly have roaming for energy, which I believe is going to be the concept of the future. And that is going to have to be, in a way, regulated by the European Union. But that is going to take longer, definitely. So I don't know, maybe we could be talking 10 to 20 years time frame, but it's going to be a real game changer for the market, not just for e-mobility, for a number of other business models like peer-to-peer energy models, not just charging. So there's a whole new area.
There's a wider ecosystem in all
exactly.
of this. Yeah. And just one thing in terms of charging that strikes me is when we think about kind of the social aspects of it all and the equality aspects as well, is we have a huge bias at the moment towards people who have a driveway and can install a home charger. They pay significantly less than people who are dependent on the public network. Is there a way of equalising all of that people, because as we move towards a more mature EV market, more and more people are going to live in apartments, they're going to live, and they're not going to have those home charger rates. So how do we address that going forward?
So that stuff, and I would say in a way that will have to be subsidized, right? And there are two ways of looking at that. So subsidized by the government, the cities, or subsidized by, if you'd like, socially responsible companies, like the net zero concept that we've heard from Schneider, or even the net positive concepts that we see nowadays. And so that will have to happen to some extent. Let me bring the case of Portugal, where we tried to solve that, and in a way we have. But actually, in the end, what we did is that we made home charging a little bit more expensive. Right? So basically, we managed to create a tariff that is the same across the entire network, integrated network, and you pay exactly the same network tariffs if you are in a public charger, if you are in a private charger. Okay, so that comes at the cost as well. But again, over time and with the growth of the network, that cost can be kind of split among all the participants, not fully to democratize the cost and split about non-EV users, because that's not what we want. But really that can be done. Other ways for companies, and that's something that we are working with a number of our customers to do, is exactly build packages for employees, for instance, where as part of their employee benefits program, they can get access to a home charger and a subscription to an EV charging network, and they don't have to they get exactly the same value regardless of where they charge, right? But that's a new kind of employer branding as well, and more sustainable companies will more and more be looking at how they can also help their employees be promoters of the change.
Yeah, because I mean, the infrastructure seems to be key in all of this, and making it as seamless and as easy for people as possible seems to be the key thing, because you don't research where the filling stations are when you go on a long journey, and yet you have to do that sort of work when you go somewhere with an EV, and we really need to make it, I suppose, as easy for people to opt for EVs as we can. And whether it's the fleet market or whether it's the consumer, just the passenger market, that seems to be the key thing. Okay, we have just a few more minutes if anybody has any questions on any of this. No, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you.